Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Patrina Firth from the APDT and this is another instalment of Train Your Dog Month. And tonight I'm joined by Ellen Greenwood-Sole from the Urban Herder. Hi Ellen.
Hi, Katrina, you okay?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Um, so you
Lovely.
love all herdy breeds, right?
Yes, all herding breeds have a particular nonchalance for collies, but most herding breeds kind of are my bag, really.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's what I've worked with for a while, and I absolutely love working with them. The way that they work, the way their brain works, it just is kind of everything that I really enjoy and really passionate about.
Yeah, it's not a dog as I'm from the middle of London that we get a lot of, although we've got quite a few collies chasing cars and things like that. But generally, they're definitely
Yeah,
more of a rural type of dog. So I don't have tons and tons of experience with collies actually, and herding breeds. A few corgis, which are always interesting, and shelties and things like that. So I'm gonna absolutely love
yeah.
watching your talk.
Well, with like the herding breeds, I live in the north, in case you can't get from my accent. And obviously, we get a lot of collies because we're kind of there's towns and then there's loads of rural communities. So we do tend to get a lot of collies that come in from those rural communities and they do kind of come into the cities. But I also think certain herding breeds are kind of almost dissociated with herding, like your corgis, your shelties, and things like that. There's kind of a bit of a separation there where people don't actually realise how involved the breed heritage is and how much that can actually impact them, even though they're not necessarily used as that every day anymore, or they're very seldom used in terms of. I think there is only like handfuls of people that actually still use shelties and corgis and stuff traditionally in the way that they're bred for, but they still have those genetic needs and those genetic behaviours that people don't always realise.
Great. All right. Well, brilliant. If you're all right, I'm going to hand you over to
Yeah.
present your slides and your presentation. If anybody's got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, say hi, let us know you're watching, and we'll come and do a Q&A with Ellen at the end. Right. Here we go.
Okay. So we're going to have a look at the herding breeds in the urban environment. Obviously, they're starting to become more and more in the pet homes, and I think it's really important that people understand where they are or who they are and where they kind of come from. But first things first, who are we? So my name's Ellen Coop. Slash Greenwood-Sole. I recently got married. I have a degree in applied animal behaviour. I'm an APDT trainer. Obviously, I have a diploma in canine behaviour science and technology, and I am also an IMDT trainer. And all this basically means is I am degree educated, so I've spent a lot of time and effort getting my education, and I go down the science based route. So I look for evidence and research to support what I do more than anything. The Urban Herder was created due to a border collie who is the boy in the bottom corner there with the balls called Jasper. Jasper was given to me by an elderly couple who just couldn't cope with him. I went on holiday and they were like, "We can't cope with this dog, we need someone to take him." I tried to find a rescue for him and fell in love and brought him back. That night he bit my husband, and the rest is history. And he was very much a dog that did struggle in the urban environment. He was from strong working lines. He hadn't necessarily had the best start from the breeder, and he had ended up in the wrong home. So he'd not only got genetic kind of drives, herding instinct and stuff coming through, he also had certain fear and anxiety problems as well. He was incredibly reactive. He was worried about life. I always said he was a bit like Chicken Little. The sky was falling. The world was going to end. He was amazing in the house. He was the perfect house dog. The second you stepped out that front door, the world was ending to him. And he was incredibly worried by stuff. He car chased. He was scared of bins. Don't ask me where that came from. He was worried by people. He was dog reactive. He was social, but he was worried, so he would react to stuff quite a lot. And we travelled all over the country together, trying to find trainers and training techniques and things to help him. And in the end, I suppose we did succeed because we got to the point where he was happy. We could take him lots of places and he could cope. And not only cope, but he was happy, which is the important thing for us, is making sure that not only are they just coping, that they're actually enjoying what we're doing with them. And in the time together that we had, he came on absolutely leaps and bounds. He was kind of, unfortunately, he died at quite a young age due to epilepsy. But just before he died, we were kind of really hitting our stride. We were going out and walking around the mountains, in the dales and the lakes. We'd entered some training competitions for He'll Work to Music, which he loved. We were going to regular classes, again, which he loved. So he'd overcome a lot of his issues and was really starting to live almost like a normal dog life. And this is where we started to realise that a lot of collies have similar issues to Jasper: car chasing, reactivity, impulsive herding, and things like that, being worried by stuff because there's lots of stuff going on for these dogs. And I started to realise that a lot of other herding breeds and other collies have very similar issues to him, maybe not all at once in the same dog. They might just have one or two of the things that he struggled with. So I started to use some of the stuff that I kind of figured out that worked really well for him, and started applying it to other dogs. And this is where the urban herder came from. It came from him. So although we didn't get much time together because he did die quite young, he's kind of got a little bit of a legacy to leave and to help other dogs, which is really quite nice. So what are collies and other herding breeds bred for? They're bred to control movement. Is the main thing. It's about manipulation and controlling of movement. So a lot of dogs, a lot of collies and other herding breeds, they've been bred to manage the movement in their environment. Now, this may look slightly different depending on the breed that you have. So, for example, collies, they like control. They want everything to be under control, and they use eye behaviour and stalking, which is all to do with the predatory sequence, to control that movement. Now, the eye behaviour in collies is incredibly unique. A lot of other breeds don't use that predatory eye behaviour in the same way. Other breeds, such as Kelpies and Hunterways and things like that, they give voice, which means they bark. And what that does is, rather than using predatory eye to assert pressure on the stock, which then controls the movement, they give voice, so they bark, and Aussies and things like that, they bark, which is why you may see that those types of breeds can be more vocal around stuff. A lot of these dogs, not only have they been bred to control movement, they're bred to be stimulated by it, and not only stimulated but reactive to it, which is where you can start to see inappropriate herding or inappropriate behaviours come around movement in the environment. So it could be something as simple as cars, people running, bikes, skateboards, children, because children are incredibly unpredictable. However, not all movement triggers herding as true herding. Sometimes herding isn't true herding if the emotion and the intent behind it is, because a lot of herding breeds can drop into herding behaviours as a coping strategy. So when they're worried, when they're stressed, anxious, fearful, whatever, in the same way we have coping strategies, like we might bite our nails, we might fiddle with our hair, collies and herding breeds do the same thing. They have coping strategies, and a lot of the time their coping strategies can be herding. So sometimes a collie may come to me with inappropriate herding behaviours, which actually turns out to be something completely different. It might be that the dog is actually worried and they're using that as a strategy. So don't just put a blanket thing on controlling of movement as just herding. Sometimes it is a coping strategy. They're bred to have really acute hearing. They have to work out and about away from the shepherd. So they do have to have really acute hearing, and they have to be able to listen as well as work. So it's kind of that two-prong sensory input where they have ears switched on to the shepherd and eye and focus on the stock. So they have to have that really kind of switched on hearing. Sociability isn't always a huge factor. A lot of these dogs traditionally live on a farm. Farms are incredibly rural places. You generally don't get loads of random people walking through farmyards. You generally don't get loads of random unknown dogs walking through farmyards again. So sociability isn't always a huge factor for these dogs, and you generally find that a lot of collies and things like that can be socially tolerant, but they're not sociable, and they don't necessarily seek out sociability or social interaction. They are okay with things being in the environment, but they don't seek out that socialness or that social interaction. Again, because of the environment they're traditionally kept in, it's that low stimulation to high, where they're generally kept in outbuildings, kennels, sheds, wherever, where it is very little going on, they're kind of kept away from stuff. So they have that downtime, that decompression time. And then they go out and they have this high stimulation where they have incredible highs of dopamine and adrenaline when they're working and they're doing exactly what they're bred for. But afterwards, they get to go back into that low stimulation environment and have that downtime, which can be a bit of a struggle when you've got a collie or a herding breed that comes into a home when there might be people coming and going all the time. There's noise all the time from the TV or the radio, or there's other dogs in the home that are moving about and things like that. And you may find that they just don't quite get that decompression and that rest that is actually needed. They're independent thinkers, but also the other half to a partnership. So when you think of a shepherd and a herding breed, whatever dog that they work with, it is a partnership, but it's also, there is an element of independence to it. So they work at a distance, and it kind of depends where the shepherd is coming from. So, for example, if you have some shepherds will literally send their dog out and expect the sheep to be gathered back to them with very little input from them. Whereas others will, if you go more towards trialing, they want to control the dog's movement a lot more strictly so that they can get them around a course. So, depending on how much and how the shepherd is will depend on how much input the dog will get from the shepherd in terms of how they want to handle it. Because some, like I say, some shepherds will literally get the dog off the back of the bike and expect the dog to do most of the work with very kind of little input, whereas other shepherds will kind of nail the dog in terms of, I want you here, you need to stop, you need to lie down, you need to do this, and control the movement in a really precise way. And it'll also depend on the job that needs doing as well, in terms of whether, like I say, in the trialing field, they have to move the sheep around the field in a really sort of specific way. They have to go through certain gates and stuff like that. Whereas if you're just out working day to day, you don't have to have that precision there. And again, farms are generally quiet, unchanging places. So this kind of goes back to that low stimulation, high stimulation. A lot of the times there's not a lot of change on farms. Yes, work is seasonal. Sometimes it may be harvesting, it might be lambing, it may be whatever. However, the farm itself and the day-to-day running of the farm, it generally doesn't change that much in terms of from the dog's perspective. So sometimes these dogs can be real sticklers for routine and for not changing of routine, which again can be quite difficult in the pet environment when we generally don't necessarily live in such strict routines anymore, especially since COVID, with people working from home, sometimes working in the office. And for me especially, I do not have set working hours. It's just the nature of my job. So I have to have dogs that are relatively flexible. Jasper wasn't particularly a dog that was particularly flexible, and I did have to try and keep to a more of a stricter schedule for him. But my others, now that we don't have him, I have a little bit more freedom because they don't need that kind of support. But it's something to consider with your dog, whether actually is it something that my dog needs? Does my dog need routine? Does it make them feel more safe and more secure? So, skills for an urban herder. And I think this is really important because I massively go down the route of skills when I train. Obedience is brilliant and there is a need for it, yes. However, I think for a lot of dogs, they actually need skills in terms of, like, for example, an ability to switch off, an ability to come in and actually rest and digest what's going on in the day. Sleep is so important for dogs. It's when late and learn occurs. It's when all those like connections are being formed, and it's really important because dogs who don't get enough sleep, especially puppies, are kind of like petulant toddlers who haven't had enough sleep, where they get grouchy and they are less tolerant and they're kind of just a bit miserable to be around. Dogs can be the same, so making sure your dog has an off switch and is getting enough sleep is really, really important. Self-control, which is a biggie for these dogs, the ability to look at something and manage themselves so that they're not just going into that reaction, which also brings us on to the ability to watch and not react. Like we said earlier, they're not only stimulated, but they're responsive to movement and things like that. So having the ability, which all working dogs have, was the ability to watch sheep and not always chase or not always do things depending on what the shepherd needs and wants in that moment. That is a skill that these dogs need so that we can manage this reactivity and things like that. Basic obedience is good. You do need recall. You do need things like that, a solid sit stay and stuff along those lines, but it's not the be all and end all, and you can build basic obedience. But some of these skills, I think, kind of gets pushed to the back. Learning to be around other people and other dogs. Now, this doesn't mean actually physically interacting with them, but as a dog living in the urban environment, they are going to be around people and they're going to be around dogs, and your dog has to learn to be okay with that. Like I say, they don't physically have to be interacting with the dog, they do not have to be interacting with the person, but they have to learn to cope with being around them, not necessarily interacting with them. And I think that's a really key point, is you do not have to have a dog that can go up and greet every dog and greet every person, because I think that's an unfair expectation. However, your dog has to be able to be okay to be in the same park as a dog. Even if they're the other end, that's okay, but they need to be okay with that. Impulse control, again, managing themselves, making sure that if they have an impulse, they don't just act on it straight away, that they can have a little bit of thinking time. And that thinking time is important because we can build stuff into that. Emotional regulation, making sure that they're not getting too frustrated and having nowhere to go, making sure they're not getting too over aroused and having nowhere to go, because you can start to see behaviours coming in with that, again with fear, anxiety and stuff like that as well. Mental stimulation is so important. I would say as important, if not more important, than physical exercise. These are really, really clever dogs. Herders are second to none, and they will figure things out so quickly, but it's making sure that we give them some mental stimulation, because these are dogs that could run all day. Are we going to run them all day? No, because it's not feasible. But we need to mentally tire them, not only physically tire them. So looking at things that we can do, whether it's trick training, scent work, herding games, little stuff like that. And they don't have to be massive training sessions. It could just be 5-10 minutes at the end of the day. Physical exercise, again, is important, but I'm going to tell you a secret. I don't walk my dogs every day. Some days, yes, they'll go out and they might have 2 or 3 hours. Other days, they might get half an hour, 20 minutes. Some days, they don't get walked at all, depending on what's going on that day. Aoife, the blue merle in these photos, she has really bad hips. So she's having a bad hip day. We won't do a dog walk that day. Again, they get mental stimulation, but they don't always get that physical exercise, and that is okay. And again, rest and downtime, which brings us back to that off switch, making sure that they are getting that, because I don't think people realise how important sleep and rest actually is for dogs. And if you have a dog that isn't getting enough, you are likely to see more behaviour problems and training issues starting to creep in. So, herders need a job. Yeah, they do. These are dogs that have been bred for a job. In the same way that brachycephalic, so dogs with squishy faces and squishy noses, have been bred for to be extreme in looks, so they have a short face. This has knock-on effects for them in terms of health-wise. Collies and herding breeds have been bred to be at the extreme of behaviours. And again, this has knock-on effects for them if this isn't fulfilled. So it's important that we do create them jobs. When I say jobs, it's a loose title, to prevent them from becoming self-employed. And also they do need that off switch. So self-employed dogs may start to do jobs that we don't want them to do, that become quite inconvenient, or are not socially acceptable, in terms of herding children in the park or herding other dogs, which is no fun for the other dog. If you're trying to have a nice day out, a sniff, and then you've got some random collie controlling every movement that you do. Many collies can really struggle, especially young adolescent collies can really struggle with becoming self-employed and not getting that off switch and that switch off that they really need. So it's really important that we provide them with suitable, appropriate jobs, things that fit into your lifestyle and with your dog, and we also teach them how to switch off, and we give them space and support to do that. So benefits of giving your herder a job: it boosts their confidence, it gives them like a sense of purpose almost, creates a strong bond between you and your dog, which is a biggie for me. Spending time with your dog and it being constructive and positive time is really important. Mentally tires them out, which brings them back to that mental enrichment, making sure we're mentally tiring our dogs, can reduce boredom. Dogs who are bored generally get up to mischief, so if they are not bored, we then will see a reduction in behaviours that we wouldn't like, such as biting, digging. For some collies it may be repetitive behaviour types, such as shadow chasing or things like that. And again, reduction in inappropriate or unwanted behaviours. So, jobs for urban herders. What can we do with our dogs? Scent work. Scent work is a biggie. I do it massively with Aoife. One of the things that I really like about scent work is the fact that dogs have full agency when they're working. In the terms of what is different with trick training and things like that, which I also really quite like, is we're constantly telling the dog what to do. However, like I said earlier, Aoife has bad hips, so she a lot of the time would do those tricks and things, but you could tell it kind of was tweaking her, and she was doing it because she wanted to work, but she wasn't physically capable of doing it properly. So with scent work, she has complete agency, and in terms of she completely can choose how slow, how fast, whether she goes up on something, whether she doesn't, how she works, she has complete. So it's really, really good for dogs that are getting a little bit older or have pain or injuries or anything like that. And it can be great as well for dogs if they have anxiety or they struggle to switch off, because it gets their nose working and kind of switches their eyes off. Scent work doesn't have to be fancy. You do not need to have your dog on a scent, and you do not need to be doing lots of like freeze indications or anything fancy like that. It could just be as simple as finding your toys or even finding food, but just make sure we're getting their nose working and they're not just looking for stuff with their eyes. Trick training is something that I love to do with my dogs. It's something that I personally really enjoy, and again, it really gets their mind working. Ball games and play. So when I say ball games can be a bit of a bit of a trigger word for some people, because people think when you say ball games that you mean mindless ball flinging, and that is kind of the complete opposite of what I mean. Mindless ball flinging is it's counterproductive. Yes, it physically tires them, but it's that repetitive behaviour which is really, really hard on their joints. And it's also kind of the opposite of what collies and herding breeds are bred for. Collies and herding breeds are bred to control movement, and having a ball constantly thrown out of control is the opposite of that. Majority of collies and herding breeds, the bit that they like in that sequence is the bit where they brought the ball back and they put it at their feet and they're looking at the ball is under control, and the shepherd, the owner, the ball is between the shepherd and the dog. However, the shepherd or the owner generally picks up the ball and flings it out of control. And again, we have out of control movement, which a lot of collies, it builds this element of frustration and adrenaline, which you can end up then with collies who become addicted to the ball throwing. So, and then you end up with like an unhealthy obsession with the ball, because they're looking for that dopamine hit, that adrenaline hit, but then you also have that frustration and conflict coming in. So when we use balls and when we use toys, we use them in specific ways. So we look at building skills such as impulse control, frustration tolerance, look at building control around movement, so teaching our dog to be able to do these behaviours while there's movement going on. And we also do lots of urban herding, so sheep balls is a big one that we also play with a lot of our clients. And enrichment is so much more than a lot of people give it credit for. It isn't just another way to feed your dog, it's a way of mentally stimulating your dog, and it's getting their brain working and also tired. So it can be food based, it can also be toy based, and it's just sometimes it's as simple as getting their kibble and rolling it up in a towel. It can be that simple, or it can be more convoluted and more difficult. It just kind of works on what you're capable of doing at that moment with your dog. It doesn't have to be massively time inducing. So, urban herding, what is that? This is a video. Hazel there playing sheep balls, and you can see she is using all her natural herding behaviours there. She's flanking, she's stalking, she's able to stop and control movement, which makes for one really fulfilled and happy collie. I'm just going to leave you with our podcast, which is called Talk Herdy to Me, by the Urban Herder, obviously. And it's not just collies. There are other herding breeds that are discussed on it. We've recently recorded an episode that's a little bit about Dutch Shepherds, which is really good. But it's a free resource for you, and we have lots of different topics on there, from puppyhood to adolescence to aggression, to all these different topics to help you and your herding breed kind of overcome some of your issues. And like I say, it's completely free. So if any of you are looking for more help with your collies or with your herding breed, please check it out, because there will be an episode there that'll be able to help you with something. So yeah, I feel like I've rushed through that a little bit. But yeah.
No, that was excellent. Thank you, Ellen. I've seen a little bit of sheep balls, but I've never quite seen it done the whole way through like you had it there. And do different colour balls represent different things for the collies, or?
No, that's just what we bought.
What you've got, okay.
That's just what we have. So what we look for is, eventually we want to start working the dog where we're not with the ball, where we can sort of direct them to the balls and things like that. But it's also looking at the technicality of it. So looking at getting square flanks where their head moves first and then their body moves. So you can start to get quite technical with it, in terms of making sure that it isn't just the dog working through the motions. It is also them doing technically the right motions when they do it, if that makes sense.
And is it just, I don't mean it like that, like just, but it's just a game that you play with your dog, or is there a competitive nature to it? Is there a league of sheep balls or anything like that? Like, I'm thinking of tribal.
At this moment in time, it is non-competitive. So it's just something to do for fun with your collie and enjoy them and sort of see them in their element and look at them doing what they're bred for, if that makes sense. So in terms of tri-ball versus sheep ball, tri-ball is more operant in terms of you teach the dog to push the ball, to move the ball, to move it in a really more operant way, whereas this works off instinct, if that makes sense, where it's looking at getting the dogs to do the behaviours they're bred for in a more traditional sense, rather than moving a ball around and us saying left, right and stuff like that. It's looking at getting the true innateness of the dog to be able to express their behaviours, rather than us saying move left, move right, if that makes sense. So theoretically, any breed of dog could do tri-ball and does do tri-ball, but sheep ball has been specifically designed for border collies because of the way that they work.
And do you find that using a game like that allows them to show that breed expression and stops the problem behaviours that you might see?
It doesn't necessarily stop the problem behaviours, but it gives them an outlet for it, so you are less likely to see it. But you can also use the game to build valuable skills, such as learning to lie down around movement, and building, like, for example, the lie down behaviour, so the stop behaviour, then being able to stop and lie down while they're in that state of arousal and herding, which can be a big issue for a lot of collies, is once they start, the owners can't get them back or can't stop them. So you can teach valuable skills through the game, which is useful for a lot of collies. Like, for example, teaching them that'll do, which is move away, come with me, it's finished. So being able to recall your dog away from opportunities to herd and things like that. So you can use the game for so much more than just giving them an outlet. It's teaching them valuable skills that are useful for any herder, I suppose.
Perfect. Great. Just going to have a quick look at the comments. I think Kathy said earlier, describing my dog, I'm her fourth home. She's living failed sheepdog life in Somerset. Well, that sounds quite nice. Yeah.
That sounds ideal.
Yeah. Be Positive said, I'm starting to get into hoopers. Great for young and old collies. I have a 6-month and a 12-year-old which love it, mental and physical. Do you have any thoughts on hoopers? Have you given it a go? Yes,
so I am a hoopers trainer for Canine Hoopers UK. I'm also a platinum member for UK Hoopers. I got into Hoopers because of Aoife, who is this Millie Mill here. And the reason I got into it over something like agility is it's much more natural movement, much more free flowing. Whereas agility is it's lots of tight turns and things like that, which for me, with her having her hip issues, she couldn't do. Whereas Hoopers is flat work, so there's no impact, no joint jumps or anything like that. And it's nice, big, sweeping movement, which feeds into everything a collie's been bred for. It's that nice, big, wide open sort of circular movements, almost like a flank, which is why I think collies should and do excel at it in an amazing fashion, if that makes sense. So I think Hoopers is bits of some of their traditional work patterns coming into some of the stuff that you see in Hoopers. So again, Hoopers is brilliant for collies. Again, you don't have the impact, so it's great for young and old, even dogs who are crippled like Peefy. Yes, like you. So you don't have to have that impact, and it's something that you can do with your dog to have a good time. And it's about that distance work again, which is again very similar to more traditional work where the shepherd generally stays relatively stationary and the dog goes out and does the work.
Excellent. Yeah, I love Hoopers because it's done on the flat. For that reason, the low impact, and it's really good for teaching distance handling. So you can be a really lazy instructor, as in you're instructing your dog to do things if you can teach them distance handling. So yeah, I love Hoopers.
I mean that's what these dogs are bred for, is that distance handling. In terms of very, very not very often would you see a shepherd running along after the dog. In fact, you'd never see it particular. The only time you may see it is if they were on a quad, but the dog would be working out in front and doing the behaviours. So Hoopers feeds, again, into that natural ability to be able to do that.
Great. Just some comments. Susanna said, brilliant advice there. Love the idea of sheep balls. Great. Laura, we've answered your question, I think, about how do sheep balls differ to tribal. Yeah, just started learning sheep ball, but Finn loves it. Sarah's got a question. Ellen, any tips for how to get people to put the ball away? I find so many collie owners love the fact that their dog is obsessed by the tennis ball and use it to get their dog's attention in almost every situation. Recall, wave ball, lunging at traffic, hold up ball, the dog out, chuck ball over and over again. I find it hard to wean the owners off their ball. It's like a security blanket, isn't it? Any tips, Ellen?
This is a thing that I liken it to like a dummy. It's a management for a lot of owners in terms of the amount of collies that I see that the owners go out with a ball flinger, and that is their only way, from what I can see, of them managing their dog's behaviour. Because without that, their dog would be left to their own devices, and I don't think they would like it. So they do use it as a management, and it's almost like, I hate to say it, but like lazy ownership. They would rather manage their dog with a ball flinger than actually train the dog through situations. And there is time and place for management, yes, 100%, but it's kind of thinking, what can we do outside of the box? So a lot of the time it's kind of looking at ways that we can still use the ball. So I never get rid of the ball, but I look at ways that the owners can use the balls in a more effective fashion. So Aoife, when I first got her, I knew very little. I was a newbie dog trainer and I played a lot of ball with her. This was before we got her diagnosis. And she is obsessed with the ball. She is one of those, I call her a recovering ball addict, because we have done a lot of work around it, but she still has that, she loves it. And it's a really powerful tool, but it's using it in an effective way that is beneficial to both the owner and the dog. So a lot of the time we will still use balls with clients like that. However, it's looking at how we use it. So rather than mindless ball flinging, we put it away. It is out of sight. The dog does the behaviour, and as a consequence of doing the behaviour, the ball appears. Rather than a fling, it's a toss and catch. So it's control of movement. They get to stop the movement. Looking at using it in that way, or looking at walking along and building in scent work where they'll drop it behind them and send the dog back to sniff for it, rather than chase, stop suddenly, impactful, and then run back. So I never, for people like that, because they are quite attached to it, and it is again like a safety blanket of having that ball is their safety blanket to be able to go, Bruno, come back quickly. I generally don't try and get them rid of it. completely. I will wean them off of it, explain the negatives of using it in the way that they do use it, and look at alternative ways to use it, whether it is setting up a mini game of sheep balls, of dropping the ball at the feet and doing a really short mini version of sheep balls with just one ball, or whether it is the toss and catch version, or whether it is the scent work version. I'll still have it as a training tool and a training aid, but I will not use it in a mindless flinging fashion.
Great.
If that makes sense.
Hopefully that's answered your question. Laura had the same sort of comment as me, which was Hoopers is also great for those of us that don't stand a hope of keeping up with our dogs.
Yeah, I have absolutely, even Eve's with all her hip issues, I couldn't keep up with. Absolutely not. So fast.
We've got a little question from Denise over on YouTube, who says, I have a nearly 2-year-old border collie, and 3 months ago he came off a field to chase a car. It was raining heavily and now he goes berserk at some loud cars, mainly in the rain. Any help, please?
So that sounds really contextual, and I would potentially be looking at sound as a potential trigger. Also, try and keep a diary of it. I know you've identified rain, but start looking at types of vehicle as well, because sometimes it can be really specific with some dogs. So Piper, she had a phantom pregnancy and she started car chasing through fear in her phantom pregnancy. One of her big triggers is buses, specifically because we walked past a bus and it released the air and went psss. And that for her is a big thing. She's not so bad with buses moving, but buses stopped at a bus stop, big issue. Not so much anymore, we've worked through it. But it's making sure, keeping a diary and being able to identify whether it is all cars, whether it's big cars, little cars, electric cars, 4x4s. Do you know what I mean? I've had clients in the past whose dog only react to white vans. So it's looking at trying to figure out what the triggers are, then looking at the distance at which your dog can cope with the training that you want to be doing, and then thinking about, okay, well, what is driving it? So like I said earlier, a lot of collies can drop into herding as a coping strategy. It's not true herding. Majority of car chasing collies I see, it's actually a coping strategy. It isn't that they want to control the car's movement. It might be that the car is scary because it's loud and unpredictable. It might be the fact that it is movement in the environment that they can't control, and that creates frustration and anxiety. It could be that they, like I said with Piper, she had a negative experience. The big psst went off next to her, and that scared her. So I'd be trying to figure out why your collie is doing the behaviour. Is it herding, or is it a symptom of something else? Is he herding because of something? If that makes sense. And then I would start, depending on why he was doing it, that would depend on how I would approach it. If it is just purely control of movement, needing to herd, I would start working around skills around that, looking at teaching him the ability to have movement and not respond to it, look at teaching a really solid emergency stop and things like that. If it was because he's worried or anxious or something along those lines, I would be looking at desensitization and building his confidence and sort of counter conditioning him to it. But it would depend as to why he's doing it, as to my approach to it.
Great. Hopefully that's answered your question, Denise. Let us know if you need any follow-up on that. Karen, a bit similar story to you. My border collie is so scared of buses, the air brake hiss in particular. She hits the deck and can't move until it's gone.
Yeah. It's incredibly overwhelming in terms of buses. I find anyway are incredibly overwhelming. They're huge. They make a lot of noise. They're quite overbearing in terms of they're very long. They're generally, if they're next to the pavement, they're up close, so there's no space to get away. And that air brake, it scared the absolute bejesus out of Piper. And it's been something that it is a bit of an ongoing thing, because that started her car chasing. So she then generalised it to cars and other things like that. We've worked through it. She now no longer car chases, and she doesn't do, because it was vans as well, she doesn't do vans or anything like that. But we still have issues around the buses and walking next to a bus that is next to a bus stop, because that's when it happened. She is getting a lot better, but luckily it's very seldom that we're in that situation. So it's kind of one of those things I haven't fully eradicated, because it doesn't come up particularly very often in our day-to-day life. And so I've had other things to be working on because of how we live. But if there is that massive fear, it's working on desensitization and counter conditioning, but it's making sure you're not moving too quickly, because what you can end up doing is sensitizing, which basically means you make it worse. So what we want to do is make sure that you're moving at the speed of your dog and not the speed you think your dog should be moving, which is what I think a lot of people can fall into, where they either start making progress at a certain speed and expect to maintain it, which, as anybody knows with training is not linear. You end up having ups and downs, setbacks and stuff like that. Or if you're anything like me and you're a pushy trainer, because I am a pushy trainer, I'm like, oh, my dog's doing well, I'll keep going, I'll keep pushing it, and I end up pushing it too far, and my dog ends up having a fit or struggling, and it's my fault because I pushed it. And it's something that I've had to be very aware of with myself, is how much I push it. We were having this discussion at the weekend with Aoife's scent work training, because we're building her indication, and I'm very, very aware that I'm a pushy trainer. And this is a thing I've had to start sort of being really more aware of myself in terms of when I'm training because of this. So it's something to think of, especially if you have a dog who is intensely fearful. But for the time being, you might be worth trying to avoid it and letting them have some decompression time as well, just to kind of get down to baseline, and then start afresh.
Yeah. Great. I think kind of comment along the same lines, really. Denise said, mine is that bad, I can barely walk her now. I was working on getting her closer, but even in the middle of a field, she loses her marbles at anything. People, dogs, cars in the distance. She pulls barking and hurts my arms. I think that probably might...
Because if you've got a dog that is that extreme and they're living in a city or somewhere like that, the problem is they never get that decompression. They never get that break. If that is the state they're getting themselves into on every single walk, you're never going to get particularly far, because they're constantly in that state. Whereas ideally, if they got into that state, sorry, my dog is licking his bowl now. If they're constantly getting themselves into that state, they're constantly on the back foot with stuff. They never kind of get over the cortisol and the stress of it. So it would be kind of thinking, okay, well, what can I do to try and minimize that? Do I need to start hiring dog fields so that we can have walks where we can just work on the training? Because you need to get basic training in there when there's nothing in the environment, to then be able to apply it when there are triggers. But if you're never capable of being in an environment where there's no triggers, then you're never capable of getting the basic training in there. So it might be looking at, okay, well, do we need to hire a dog field somewhere where we know we can go and be safe and give my dog that time to be a dog without the pressures of potentially being a person or another dog or something that they struggle with, if that makes sense as well.
Great. And Rosie has got a question. My 18-month-old collie is reactive to animals, barking, lunging, and will currently charge deer and horses if off lead, working really hard on disengagement and building value in us. Is it possible to overcome?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I would never say I would 100% trust my dogs, like around livestock and stuff. I would not have my dogs off lead in a field with sheep or something like that, because they're not my sheep, not my place to do it. However, we have been really successful with working on like a down to movement. So when there's movement in the environment, my dogs clap down. Working on having a really solid lie down or emergency stop behaviour as well. So for example, if they do give chase, I'm able to say lie down, and they will just clap down. Piper, again, through her phantom pregnancy, she started chasing birds, and we worked on, again, that disengagement and stuff, but making sure that the reinforcement was right. So a lot of people try and use food and stuff like that, but a lot of dogs or collies, herding breeds, when they're in that state, they can't take food. They're not in the right emotional state or part of the predatory sequence to take food. So I started combating chasing with chasing. She would look at the thing she wanted to chase, which for her was birds. She would have to disengage, and she would get opportunity to chase, but chase a tuggy with me. So I was giving her an outlet for the behaviour she wanted to do, but with me in a safe and controlled fashion, and she'd have a successful chase. Whereas if she chased the bird would fly away and she would never get a catch and a follow through. And a lot of the time, once you get kind of a little bit of that arousal and stress out with the tuggy or the chase behaviour, they will then start to take food, and you can work on the arousal through stuff like that. But for a lot of these dogs, I'd be looking at also doing side work around impulsivity around movement, looking at building a clap down or a lie down behaviour or something like that, and being able to have, so working with flirt pulls or tuggies and things along those lines, to be able to have that control around movement, and then build into things like deer, rabbits, whatever it is that your dog is struggling with, birds in our case.
Great. And Denise just had a follow-up comment saying, thank you, I'm currently doing desensitising as feel it is fear as he cowers and keeps looking back as he knows it's coming behind him. That was about the air brake on the bus. It's bigger, noisy vehicles, but seems okay when they're at a distance. That says.
So that sounds incredibly similar to Piper. And like I said, we've got over the majority of it. She still has her moments. But like I said, for us, it's not a massive factor. So we've had other things to work on. But keep working at it. And make sure that you're giving your dog, if you find that they have a really bad day, give them a decompression day for the next day or two to let them just have a bit of time. Don't just hammer working on this all the time, because it's not fair on your dog to every walk to be put in those situations. Make sure they are having time to just be a dog and sniff and just do dog stuff rather than just constantly working around their fears.
Great. And Laura's just got a nice little comment saying, a fab talk, Ellen, thank you. It was a rescue collie that started my training journey. I then went on to have others and foster problem collies with bite histories. They all taught me so much, but I wish I'd known then what I know now. Yeah. Great.
Oh, I always think that with PT, I made so many mistakes with Aoife. I could literally write a book on it. There's so many stuff that I've kind of had to unpick and undo with Aoife because of, I think, views I had of collies at the time, which were naive, or they've come from, because a lot of the collie books and stuff are written by farmers from a farming perspective, and they're not written from a pet owner kind of perspective. So it's kind of understanding how some of those traits that make them such amazing work dogs and farm dogs actually translate into urban pets, because it's not always as linear as you think the translation would be.
Yeah. And a lot of people get collies from farms and then pop them in a 3-bed semi, and they're like, oh, they're from a farm, but we're not going to work sheep with them. And the collie's like, yeah, I've got other ideas, actually.
Yeah, and even like people who buy collies from pet dogs, they're only they're still farm dogs.
Yes.
They were from a farm, but they're in a pet home. So it's still a farm collie. It's just a farm collie in a pet home. If that makes sense. So like I recently had a litter of myself, even though they were pet collies, they were from working stock, and I made that very clear to people who were getting one of my boys. I was like, these are not like couch potato dogs. They've come from a working mother and a working father. They are working line collies still, even though they have been born and raised in a pet home, and I've done puppy culture and I did as much as I could to prepare them for life and make nice, resilient, confident puppies. They have still come from working lines, so you will still massively have genetic factors, and I get videos through all the time of them, and I can see either their mum or dad in them straight away. And it's little stuff that they do, or the owners will say, oh well, they're not bothered in balls. So Piper doesn't care for balls, she cares for the dog chasing the ball. And the boys, none of them really play ball, but what they do is they play, or they heard the dog playing with the ball. And I'm like, that is, and they message me like, oh, they don't want to play fetch. I'm like, first of all, please don't start doing that. Second of all, that is their mother coming through and through. That's where that's come from. It is what it is. If that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. And Denise just said, thank you, I will keep going. He's such a lovely boy at home, just a fruitcake outside.
That sounds like Jasper. It was like Chicken Little. In the house, he was the perfect dog. Second he walked out the front door, the sky was falling, the world was ending, he couldn't go. But he did, like I said, we did so much with him, and towards the end he lived such a fulfilled life. We could go out walking in the mountains, we could take him on holiday to seasides, he could do so much, and he was, like I said, he was happy doing it, which for me is the most important thing, because there was a point in his training where he could do it, but he was on edge, and we worked through that, and we got him to the point where he could do it and be happy at the same time, which is the important thing, is making sure that not only can they do it, but they're also happy and content and confident in doing it. It was not we're just putting them in a situation and they're there, they're not responding, but they're just completely shut down or overwhelmed, if that makes sense. So a quiet collie or a non-reacting collie doesn't necessarily mean a happy collie.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Ellen. That's all the questions and comments gone through. Have you got anything else that you want to add? People can find out. You can give your name of your podcast and your website again.
Like I say, we have the Talk Herdy to Me podcast where we have special guests coming on. We've done different topics about like herding breeds and children, aggression, agility, lots of different stuff. We've got some really good stuff coming up about, like, for example, scent work. We've got some farmers coming in and talking about collies in a more traditional setting and how they kind of, their approach to stuff and how they see collies and how stuff like that, which is a really nice one. We also have our Collie Collective, which is an online subscription service where you get access to us. We do monthly webinars and talks about different topics which you guys can pick. We also have a plethora of modules and stuff to work through for car chasing, teaching that off switch, engagement focus. We've got some new modules coming out about building that stimulation to movement and building those clap downs and things like that, that which will be released in the next month or so. And again, we do workshops all around the country, so if anybody wants any help or wants to learn sheep balls or anything like that, drop us a message and hopefully we'll be coming somewhere relatively near you. But yeah, if you have any questions after this, please just drop us a message.
Great. Thanks so much. Thank you very, very much. And that just leaves me to say that we're back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We've got some armchair training. So if you like sitting in your chair at home or for whatever reason you are sat in a chair, we've got Jude Irvine, APDT member, coming on to talk to you about how you can train your dog from the comfort of your armchair. So tune in at 6 for that. Thanks very much. Thanks for listening. Thanks for coming, Ellen.
Thank you.
Good night.